This is a revision video for the social influence processes in social change, and this is on the advanced information for the exams in 2022 for AS level psychology. It's not on the advanced info for A level, so if you're in year 2 about to do your A levels, it's not on that advanced info, but if you're doing AS level exams, it is on the advanced info. So we're looking at how to achieve social change. What are the social influence processes to achieve social change? And so first of all, you need to know what social change is. And social change is where we see shifts in attitudes and behaviours and laws to do with particular issues in society, where a culture and a society starts behaving differently to do with a certain group of people or a particular issue. So for example, you can see on the screen, hopefully, there's a picture on the left of Pride, which celebrates LGBTQIA plus people, whereas in the past, homosexuality was illegal until 1967 in the UK. So it's gone from the late 1960s, where homosexuality was illegal. We have seen shifts in attitudes, values and laws, and now LGBTQIA plus is something to be celebrated. You can also see a picture there, hopefully, of the Paralympics. And so we've seen shifts in attitudes towards people with regards to their abilities or disabilities. And so now people with all abilities have the opportunity to compete at an Olympian level. Absolutely incredible. And so in the past, people were viewed in a different way. So social change is where important things in society, like environmental issues or LGBTQIA plus issues or disability issues or racial issues or any issues really, like environmental things, that we see shifts in changes in behaviour and attitudes. And so what we're looking at is, how do you achieve that social change? And according to psychology, you can achieve social change, you can achieve those shifts through both majority and minority influence, both of which you should have studied earlier in the unit. So we're going to look at how to achieve social change through both minority influence and through majority influence. And we're going to start with majority influence. And this was way back at the beginning of the unit when we were looking at conformity. And conformity is where people everybody else is doing something and then you want to fit in with what everyone else is doing. They don't tell you what to do, but you feel that pressure to comply with how everyone else is behaving. And so psychology takes that majority influence, that knowledge about conformity, and will use social norms interventions to capture the people who are maybe doing things that are unhealthy or discriminatory, to try and tell them what everyone else is doing, and then that should pressure them. They should feel influence to behave and start thinking in the same way. So social norms interventions change misperceptions of what people think is the majority view. And when people know how the majority of their peers or are behaving, they experience normative social influence. And remember, that's where you conform to be liked. You conform to fit in, and so therefore people might change their behaviour to fit in with the majority. And the example on the screen, you can see there's a social norm intervention which has been tweeted that says 97% of 11 to 15-year-olds in England are not regular smokers. 81% have never smoked. And so perhaps they're definitely trying to capture that 11 to 15-year-old age group, and they're telling them what everyone else their age is doing, and so they should experience normative social influence and therefore either quit smoking or don't start smoking. Social change through minority influence is harder to achieve. So majority influence means most people are doing it anyway, and you're just trying to capture those few percent that aren't doing it. Minority influence is where you get a small group of people who are trying to get everybody else to change their way of thinking to their way of thinking. And so there's many more stages, social influence stages and processes in order to achieve that. And it's very difficult. If people do change to start thinking like the minority, then it's a much deeper level of change, because they've had to really think and internalize the message. You think about levels of conformity, the most superficial is compliance, where you just kind of go along with the crowd to fit in, whereas the deepest level we know is internalization, and that's where you've internalized the message and it's become part of who you are. So Conversion is often used, that word, like you've converted to the way of thinking of the minority. And so we're going to look at how do you achieve that. It's very difficult, but how is it achieved? And we're going to look at each of these 5 stages. The first stage is through drawing attention to an issue. So if you're a minority, people won't know what your particular cause is, and so therefore you've got to do something to get noticed. So the pictures on the screen are, the top picture is Emmeline Pankhurst, who was arrested outside Buckingham Palace in 1914, and she was trying to give a petition to King George V at the time. So she was making a protest and she was arrested for that, and the media would have been really all over it and interested, drawing attention to her issue, which was obviously the suffragette movement and votes for women. The other picture you can see there is from September 2021, and it was a group called Insulate Britain. This is a more up-to-date minority group, and if you're watching this maybe a few years in the future, you'll be thinking of more recent minority groups, which obviously we don't know about yet, or I don't know about. But Insulate Britain was 2021, and they are protesting there outside the Home Office. Now, they are a minority group and they are worried about climate change. So their cause is for people to insulate their homes, and they're calling on the government to provide the resources for people to do that so that they can help with climate change. So both of these groups and all minority groups will they might demonstrate, because that will get media attention. It means that their cause will get known. This is like big scale stuff, and it could be large scale, it could be small scale. It might be within your college, people are trying to persuade people to reuse their cups in the canteen because they're worried about the waste of paper cups. And in that case, they would do a demonstration. It's unlikely that they would do something which would get them arrested, but they might like make posters. They might dress up as a reusable cup or something, because they want to draw attention. If we don't know what you're doing, the minority group, then we can't change attitudes, behaviours, opinions and laws. So drawing attention to the issue is the first process. The second process is called cognitive conflict. Now, cognitive, if you hear the word cognitive or cognitions, it's talking about your thoughts. And so cognitive conflict talks about a person having conflicting thoughts in their head. They're basically having an argument in their head. And you probably experienced this. If someone said something and then later on you're like, oh, I should have replied like that, and you replay the conversation in your mind, and it's probably something that's bugged you, something that's annoyed you. So the minority want to cause arguments in other people's heads, because when you're having an argument in your head, then you are thinking deeply about an issue. You might not necessarily agree with what you've seen or heard, but you are arguing with yourself. You've got conflicting thoughts, and therefore it's going to make you think deeply, and that's part of the process of change. So the example on the screen is from Insulate Britain. They did a protest on the M25 that delayed an ambulance, and this was all over social media and the news. And so of course people are angry, and they're saying, oh, those people are so stupid, they're causing they stopped an ambulance getting through. But actually, what are they protesting about? Maybe we should be worried about climate change. Oh, well, I am worried about climate change, but they should not have stopped that ambulance. And so they're arguing, they've got cognitive conflict, and that argument is in their head, which means that minority group is in their head. The third process in social change for minority influence is consistency of position. And that means that the minority group have to have the same message amongst themselves and the same message over time. If they change their message between themselves or over time, they are seen as weak and they dilute their message. And so the suffragettes were consistent with their issue. It took them 15 years of saying votes for women to finally get votes for women. If they had disagreed amongst themselves and said, look, why don't we just say like equal pay for women, or better rights to do with working conditions for women, then if they were allowed to work, another story, then that message would have got diluted. So consistency of position is absolutely important. And you would know from when you did minority influence, the Moscovici blue-green slide study. In that study, the consistent minority influenced the majority 8% of the time, which doesn't sound a lot, but the inconsistent minority didn't persuade them at all. It was less than 1%. And so for a minority to be successful, you have to be consistent with your message between each other and over time, otherwise you're never going to make a difference, according to the research. The fourth process for minority influence is called the Augmentation Principle. And when you looked at minority influence, you looked at something called consistency, which we've just said, commitment and flexibility. And the commitment side was where people have to show they're willing to sacrifice and usually like give up something like their time or money, which shows they're really committed to their cause. Now, with social change, we call it, it's still that kind of commitment, but we call it augmentation, where that sacrifice might be on a really deeper, like even more extreme level. So if the minority appears willing to suffer for their cause, then they are seen as committed, they're taken more seriously. And some examples from history are things like the suffragettes were imprisoned, they went on hunger strike, they experienced force feeding, like the woman in the picture there in prison. They really suffered for their cause. And so that meant their influence became more powerful because they were augmented to it. Another example of augmentation was suffragette Emily Davison, who sacrificed her life when she walked in front of the King's horse. And a more recent example is from Insulate Britain, where Biff Whipster, apparently, and Stephen Pritchard, according to Insulate Britain, they are currently, they served 28 days in prison so they are suffering. They've sacrificed their freedom by protesting, so they've been arrested, put in prison, which shows they're willing to suffer and they are augmented to the cause of insulating Britain. The final process in social change for minority influence is called the Snowball Effect. So when you think about a snowball, it starts off small, and then when you roll it around in the snow, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So the snowball effect refers to the tipping point when the minority become the majority. So more and more people start changing their way of thinking about the minority cause. And so we call it the snowball effect when that has occurred. And minority social change can't occur without the snowball effect. So if you look at that picture there, that's actually a picture of women practicing how to vote because they'd never done it before and didn't know how to. But universal suffrage so all adult citizens having the right to vote was finally accepted by the majority of people in the UK, and so the values, the attitudes, the behaviours and the laws changed so that women could vote. And so that was the last stage. And the final stage is part of that actually. It's called social cryptoamnesia. So amnesia you've probably heard of, and it means that people have forgotten something. If you've got amnesia, you can't remember. Social cryptoamnesia refers to when social change has occurred and now society accepts the change without really remembering maybe how it came about or what life was like before. So you can see a picture of a woman here casting her vote, and in the morning when it was voting day, she probably just got up and went and voted, didn't necessarily think about all the suffrage that had occurred before her. I know that I do because my grandma was really passionate about what the suffragettes had done and always told that to me when I was little. And so I do think about the suffragettes, but most people don't. They just think, oh, it's time to vote. And then a woman will go off when she's 18 years old and have that right to vote. And so social cryptoamnesia means that that social change is now so marked, it is so accepted as the norm that people maybe have forgotten what life was like before it, or don't know or can't remember. So this question says, which type of social change is likely to be more long-lasting according to psychological research, minority or majority influence? And so when you think about the types of conformity that occur for both of these, majority influence, it means that you are getting a smaller group of people to comply. We've got compliance, which is the most superficial level of conformity. And so therefore that means that they are just fitting in for the time being. It might mean that they don't stick with that social change because really they've changed their views publicly but not necessarily privately. Whereas minority influence, if you can achieve social change through minority influence, then people will have had to internalize the message. So we're looking at the deepest level of conformity called internalization. Moscovici referred to conversion, where people convert their way of thinking. It's so hard to do that if it is achieved, it tends to be permanent and long-lasting. So we'll look at the evaluation points now. The first is research support for majority influence. So research support for social norms interventions, saying that they do work. And so some research was done where messages were hung on front doors of houses in an area of California every week for 1 month. And one of the messages had a normative message, So it had the social norm intervention. It says most people try to reduce their energy use to help the environment. So it's telling you what most people do, whereas the other one just said help the environment, try to use less energy. It was just a message telling you what to do. And they found there was a significant decrease in energy use of those that experienced the normative message. So this is showing that social norms interventions can be successful. However, social norms interventions are not always successful. And so this next piece of research is saying that actually maybe it depends on the group of people you're trying to target and the type of thing you're trying to target as to whether it's successful. So the researchers found that they wanted to lower alcohol use in students across 14 different sites, and they used social norms interventions, however, and they used those to correct misperceptions, so telling them the majority of people don't binge drink or drink a lot of alcohol. But despite this, it didn't alter their behaviour, the people they were trying to target. They still found self-report for binge drinking and social change did not occur. So that's evidence to criticise the social norms interventions as a way of causing social change. The third evaluation is also criticism. So this is saying that there's something called the boomerang effect. When it comes to social norms interventions, the boomerang effect means that you're actually achieving the opposite of what you wanted to achieve. So by telling the minority of people what everyone else is doing, you're hoping to scoop those up and achieve social change. So for example, supposing you wanted to tell people that about recycling, like most people do this amount of recycling. Your aim is to get the people who aren't recycling to recycle, but what you might do is get the people who are doing tons and tons and tons of recycling, and you're giving them a message that everyone else is doing less than them, and therefore they go, oh, well, if everyone else is doing less, then I'll do less. And so the social change you wanted to achieve, like in this case, environmental change, actually doesn't occur. The opposite occurs, where you are causing people to do less recycling in this case, and we call it the boomerang effect because it's something that comes, it's meant, something that's meant to go forwards actually comes back to you. Boomerang comes back to you, and it reduces what you want to happen. The next evaluation is to do with minority influence, and it's both a positive and a negative. And it's the idea that minority influence can cause permanent attitude and behaviour change. However, it's really slow. So you can use the example of the suffragettes movement. So they achieved, through minority influence, through all those processes and social change, they achieved votes for women. So they achieved votes for women, absolutely fantastic. And it was permanent and the laws changed. However, it took them 15 years of campaigning to get the vote and a further 10 years to get equal voting rights to men. So it's very gradual, very slow, and that is a limitation of minority influence. It's not going to happen overnight. And a final evaluation is about minority influence, and it's a criticism, and it's that sometimes people who are in a minority group are viewed as deviant by the majority, and if they're viewed as deviant, then their message is actually lost, and so they won't achieve the social change they want because people don't want to be aligned with them, people don't want to be associated with them. So I was looking through tweets to do with Insulate Britain, and I found like celebrities and regular people who are absolutely slating the members of Insulate Britain. And so the first one you can see on the screens, she refers to people in Insulate Britain as dangerous terrorists, and they should be treated as such. So you would never want to align yourselves with terrorists, and so the message has been lost. And the second person refers to people in Insulate Britain as loons, bonkers and nut jobs, which are incredibly derogatory terms. And she's put there, let's be honest, many of us plebs have said the same, as apparently Piers Morgan had referred to those people. So you can see that when people view the minority as deviant, then they are not going to align themselves with them, and so social change may not occur because people don't want to be associated with the group who are actually campaigning. Okay, the next thing to do are some consolidation activities where you're going to do some exam style questions to apply your knowledge and then just answer some regular questions as well. So the first one says, Nadia and Oliver are friends. They found out that a leading makeup brand called Look Good were testing their makeup on rabbits. Using insights from social influence research, explain how the students might bring about social change to stop look good testing their products on animals, 6 marks. So this is a straight AO2 question. You don't have to outline the processes in social change. You need to apply them to this scenario. And we can see it's minority influence because we just got Nadia and Oliver, who are 2 people who are going up against a leading makeup brand. By the way, I made that brand up. It doesn't exist, but they're called Look Good. And so you need to identify how would Nadia and Oliver draw attention to the issue? How would they cause cognitive conflict? And you might use that image you can see on the screen to do that. What consistent message should they have? Don't just say they would have to be consistent in their message between themselves and over time. That's great. What message would they give? And it's a really simple one in this case, isn't it? It's like stop testing products on animals. So they would stick to the same message. You then talk about the augmentation process. So how would they suffer for their cause? Now be realistic. This is just a couple of college friends. They're not going to get imprisoned, I hope, but they might spend their own time and money, and they might do a protest whereby people, you know, which would draw attention to themselves, but they might feel quite shy about that, and so that means that they might be suffering. But just think about how they would augment themselves and show their commitment. You might then mention the snowball effect, how would we know if the tipping point had occurred, and if you've got time you could put social cryptoamnesia in there as well. The next question says, it's another AO2, apply your knowledge. A survey at college found that 97% of students said they were allies of people who identify as LGBTQIA+. Using insights from social influence research, explain how students might bring about social change to encourage all students to be allies, 4 marks. So this is quite obviously a majority influence question, and you need to use the right terminology. So make sure you talk about social norms interventions and how you would do that. What might you do? And talk about normative social influence and the fact that you are the majority trying to persuade this smaller group to become allies. The third question I've given you, I'd like you to try on your own, and it says it's a timed exam question. So you would write the question and then practice writing it. It's a 6 marker in either 7 minutes, because that's how long you get in the exam, or about 8.5 if with extra time. So Yinyo and Alina are concerned about the number of paper cups being used in the college canteen. They read an article that said that 6.5 million trees are cut down for single-use paper cups each year. They want staff and students to start using their own reusable cups. So it says explain the processes that they should go through in order to bring about the social change of using reusable cups at college, 6 marks. So think about what you did with the animal rights one. Think about those processes, because again this is minority influence, and then apply it to this situation and write the question and then practice writing it in that timed in 7 minutes. You should also have a go at the extended essay. So if you're in the second year, if you're doing A level, then it would be a 16 marker. If you're still doing, some college students do AS level, and so in that case, if it's AS level, it's 12 marks. And so you've got a timed essay here that with a stimulus. So a small group of students in a college realise that most other students vape. They believe that vaping is not a healthy habit and want to encourage everyone else to quit vaping. Outline and evaluate social influence processes in social change. Explain how the small group should go about encouraging their peers to quit vaping in your answer. So if you're in the second, if you're A level and it's a 16 marker, then you'll do description. You need to outline social influence processes and social change, and that includes minority and majority influence for 6 marks. Then you apply it to the small group of students for 4 marks, and this is obviously a minority group, so you apply it for 4 marks. Then you do 6 marks worth of evaluation, so 3 evaluation points on, like, roughly. If you're in AS level, then it'll be a 12 marker, so it's still 6 marks to describe it, and that'll be majority and minority influence. Then you only get 2 marks, so you've got to very, very briefly describe how they could go about changing the behaviour. And then they've got 4 marks for evaluation, so that should be 2 evaluation points, and you should really go for like 1 strength and 1 limitation. You can try these other exam style questions. These are short answer questions, so maybe pause the video and answer those. And these are the picture references.